Before we begin, I also want to let you all know that there are some handouts that are associated with this webinar. We have a slide deck, which are the full slide presentations of the full slides of this presentation. There's also this presentation within a handout format that you can download. And in addition, there is an expanded document that gives a little bit more about some of the templates and routines that I'm going to get into as part of this presentation. So I want to introduce myself to all of you. My name is Maureen Blajeski, and I am an educational consultant who works with the Massachusetts Down Syndrome Congress. Now, I really want to welcome everybody here who's able to join us. And before we get started, I do want to know a little bit more about you, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of background related to my professional experience and how it shapes the content within this presentation. So we have a few polls that I'd like for people to take a few seconds and answer. So our first poll is, hold on one second, our first poll is just finding a little bit about who's with us today. What grade level are you focused on? What grade level is your child in? If you are a teacher, what grade level do you teach or do you support? So just take a few seconds and answer that question related to the grade level.
We're not seeing any votes come in. Just choose
Okay.
one.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Thank you for those of you who vote. All right.
I'm not seeing any. I'm not seeing any polls.
Okay.
I'm not seeing any answers, I guess is what I should say.
Okay.
Oh wait, there we go. Okay, they're starting. Okay, now we're voting.
Excellent.
Great.
Excellent.
Lovely.
Yeah, just let us know about which grade level your child is in or your students are in. And we have a couple of poll questions for the end of the webinar as well, but just knowing a little bit more about the audience is very helpful.
So we only have about 33% of the audience that have chosen one, and it's mostly middle school.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll so we don't.
Sure.
So we're going to close that poll, and there we go. And then did you want to launch the other one?
Yeah, we'll do the second question. Yeah, the second question. You know, just in terms of who all of you are, you know, are you a teacher? Are you a parent? Are you an educator? And what's your specific role? It just helps us make sure that as we develop ongoing webinars, we are really meeting the needs of the people who are in the audience.
All right, got more voting coming in. So we have about 67% in, and it's parents. Parents,
okay,
with parents on the line.
Yay, that's great.
So I will close the poll, and then it's back to your screen.
All right, great. All right, so I want to tell you all a little bit about myself and the experience that I bring to you. So prior to my current role as an educational consultant and coach, I was a teacher who worked in public schools for 17 years. And I worked in a variety of roles. So I've worn the hat of classroom teacher, I've worn the hat of special education teacher, and as inclusion specialist. So homeschool communication was a significant part of my professional responsibility when I was working in the field. And for 3 years, I was the education director of the Massachusetts Down Syndrome Congress. And in that role, I oversaw all aspects of educational programming within the organization. And during that time, I was also working with another Down syndrome organization in the Boston area called the 321 Foundation. And in that position, I'm involved as the lead special education teacher, the director for children's programming at the Learning Program Boston. And in addition, I work directly with schools in districts in Massachusetts, and I provide professional development, coaching, and consulting with teachers and teams around specific aspects of individual student programming. And as part of that, significant focus has been around homeschool communication. So this fall, I transitioned to full-time consulting, but I still work very closely with the MDSC, but in the role of a consultant related to the educational programming. So DSAIA, MDSC, and the 321 Foundation are all excited to be collaborating together to present this series of educational webinars because we really want to support families and teachers by addressing topics that all of you need, things that are very relevant to your day-to-day. So that's really our goal. So if we think about what our goals for this webinar are, our focus today is going to be examining the practices of homeschool communication through a multi-lens perspective. In my roles of teacher in the field, in my role of the education director at the MDSC, and in my role as a consultant and as a coach, I have the perspective of the practitioner who is responsible for the homeschool communication. I have the perspective of families who are really looking for a tool that is going to support them related to their child's education. And I also see the perspective of other practitioners in the field and the questions and concerns or confusions that they may have related to homeschool communication. So we're going to talk about that first. And then our secondary goal is to explore routines and templates that can be utilized that will provide both home and school with the targeted useful information that they need. Because all of us know that effective communication absolutely contributes to a student's success. So with our children with complex learning needs, especially those with significant communication challenges, finding a way to bridge information back and forth between home and school is essential. And I really, the visual that's always in my mind when I think about the positive results of that back and forth communication is that the wheels really do turn more smoothly when there is a mutual communication system in place. So I mentioned this a little bit before, but I want to set the stage for you again around why I am bringing this to you today and what has led me to developing the routines and systems that I recommend both within the school districts that I work in and with families that I, talk with individually. I have found that when you are in the trenches, it's very, very hard to problem solve. When I work within school districts, I say this to teachers all the time, that my job is to tell them that they don't know how to do their job. My job is to support them around problem solving the things that they don't have the perspective or space to reflect on and develop systems. And this is very true for homeschool communication. In the trenches, both parents and teachers are very focused on the day-to-day of their students. In the unique roles that I have, I've really been provided with a 10,000-foot view, and I have the space to look, evaluate successes and challenges for both families and teachers, and that's really what has informed the recommendations that I'm going to talk about today. So, like I said, when I talk to teachers, I say it wasn't until I was able to step back that I was able to solve the problems that I experienced on a day-to-day basis. So that is very much where my recommendations come from, not as someone who's always had it figured out, but as someone who felt that need for making it better while I was in the process of doing it. And that really is the center of my current professional practice. So again, from that 10,000-foot perspective, I know that homeschool communication can absolutely be a source of stress and tension on both sides. And I see often that both parents and teachers are working so hard to make their communication system really work and be effective, but sometimes neither is satisfied with the result. A lot of times that really has to do with perspective, and sometimes I think that we're trying to guess what the other person wants, and when it's very, very open-ended and it's not a very structured process to go into play, you're not using a very structured process to establish what your routine will be. You are really leaving what homeschool communication is up to interpretation, which can sort of set the spark for something that can grow into a much bigger emotional catalyst between the teachers and the parents. So I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to talk about homeschool communication in a very clinical manner. And I think that bringing back the function and goals of what a homeschool communication system should be helps everyone get on the same page and develop some really effective routines. So on a very basic level, definition, communication between home and school is essential. It's an essential practice for kids, and it's rooted in this idea of sharing essential information. And that essential information is required for a student to be successful within their educational setting. So it's really saying, I have a student with very complex needs, and in addition to what we already have in place, I know that this child requires something more in order for them to be successful. And that's very much the clinical look, and why for students with complex needs, we do have a homeschool communication system. Students who do not have complex needs do not require very in-depth, they do not require additional homeschool communication. I have a 4th grader and I have a 1st grader, and neither of my children have a homeschool communication system because they don't have communication challenges that would require that of them. That being said, I do not get that much information out of them related to what happened related to their day. All of you parents can relate to, hey, how was your day? Good. What'd you do? Nothing. Recess. But when I really probe deeper, and when I use the communication systems that are already in place within my children's school, I'm able to fill in the blanks. I'm able to use that information as a catalyst to build in a picture of what my child's day is like. So when we're thinking about an individualized homeschool communication system, we really have to stop and think, all right, how is information already being shared, and what information is already being shared? So first, look at it from the whole school and the whole classroom lens. So think about, and every school is different, every school has a different culture, but systemically there are usually communications that go out to all families within a school, giving some big picture information related to PTO, activities, upcoming dates, when the release day is. And those might come through robocalls. It could be direct emails from the school. Some people have very active PTO website or Facebook pages. And then think about your classroom. Some teachers do weekly newsletters. I know that for my first grader, she's in an integrated classroom, and part of the homeschool communication for some of the students with complex needs in that classroom is just a weekly summary from the teacher to all the parents, just giving some highlights of what they're working on through the week. And I love it because I can say, oh, you're starting Simple Machines. I didn't realize that. Tell me more about Simple Machines. Think about what's already there. And think about what you get at open house. Think about what you might get at curriculum night. And then think about your child, the individual student, and reflect on what's already in place systemically. And we know that there are annual reviews and IEP development meetings. We know that information comes home in progress notes, report cards, which for some people may be helpful, other people may say not helpful at all, and also conferences. Frequency of conferences in schools varies depending on the district, the systems, the contracts. So you really want to think, okay, what's already in place? And then you have to look a little deeper through the lens of the individual child. You have to say as a team, are those existing systems enough for both you as the family and for the teachers to get the information that they need to support this child? So some things you want to ask yourself. Does this student have the communication skills to convey some information about their day that will contribute to meaningful reciprocal conversations at home or at school? So my first grader will go into school and report probably far more information than I want her to related to her day-to-day at home. I get a little less information from school, but she has the communication skills that she needs to have a conversation with someone about her life, about her interests. If your child has communication challenges and they're really spending time between two settings, a really big function of this communication system is to share information that will facilitate some of this reciprocal conversation skills. Then you have to think, does this student have the communication skills to relate important curriculum information to their family? So my fourth grader will come home and say, hey, we're about to start the American Revolution. In math, we're working on big numbers. Mom, I hate rounding. I'm getting that from her. I have an idea about what they're working on. She tells me how much she hates rounding. I can do a little work with her on rounding those bigger numbers. I'm getting that information directly from her. And then the question is, does the student require additional practice or previewing or exposure in order to access the curriculum? So while I've been speaking about my two children, I also have a niece who has Down syndrome who is in fourth grade, like my daughter. And I know that part of what she requires is additional practice around some of the skills that she's learning in her specialized instructional setting. I know that my sister will often look for YouTube videos related to some of their social studies and science content because she wants to support her ability to make meaning of what's happening in her day-to-day in her classroom. So if your child requires that, then absolutely you should be getting some additional communication. So you've reflected on those questions, and then you think to yourself, what else does this child need, and why do they need it? So you can identify this student is globally working on conversational skills. Both teachers and parents want to facilitate interpersonal communication and relationships. We need to have this system. This student requires the practice of skills across all settings in order to generalize and demonstrate mastery. Or, you know, even if you are able to access the curriculum overviews for general education, and I know that some districts have that right online, so anybody can look and say, oh, social studies in middle school is working on, right now they're working on ancient Rome. And you can see what the essential information within the general curriculum is, but you don't know what the essential information that you should be focusing on with your child should be. So when you identify these gaps, this will provide you with the blueprint for your communication system design. Now, before I move to the next slide, I remember that I wanted to mention that I am very happy to answer questions. And I'm going to pause after the first section, about halfway through, to address some of the questions that you have. But as they pop up in your head, be sure to type them into the questions pane on your toolbar. And then when we pause, we will be able to see them, and I will be able to answer them for all of you. So I want to make sure that you know that there is a space to get more information or ask for clarification. So we know that when you go through this reflection process, you really start to identify the buckets and the places where there are gaps in information. And this exercise may feel unnecessary, but it is incredibly important, because once your team determines that additional specialized communication is required, then teachers have to find time within their day to complete this professional task. And when you figure out as a team beforehand what has to be communicated, this will make sure that the professionals aren't using instructional or planning time, because that is realistically when a daily system gets completed. When, you know, instructional or planning time, when they're filling it in, you want to make sure that you're focusing on essential information, and you don't want to be using that time to be communicating non-essential information, because we all know that instructional and planning time is also really, really important for your child as well. And what has to happen is that everyone on the team needs to develop an effective and efficient routine, and that really is what will support teachers in being able to execute it with fidelity, and they'll be able to fulfill all the professional responsibilities that they have within that time. And one thing I want to caution people about is that you really want to keep the function of that homeschool communication system clean. The reason it is on the IEP and the reason that you determine that your child needs this is because of those things that we reflected on a few slides before. So it has a very, very specific purpose. And you want to make sure that you are not using this system to criticize or to question judgment call or even use it to evaluate the efficacy of a teacher, because that is not the function of the school, of the tool. And while as you get data within a homeschool communication, there absolutely may be some concerns that become highlighted for you related to your child's programming. Absolutely, that may be evident within your homeschool communications. However, if you address and respond to those concerns through this platform, it will affect the efficacy of the tool itself. Because what will happen is that communication will start to break down, and the actual goals and what the function of the system is, it will stop being achieved. And, you know, I work in a lot of districts. I've worked with a lot of teachers in my own practice. And this is really important because so it's really important on both sides of the table, actually, because I know that some parents have said that they feel like sometimes homeschool communication has an underlying tone that may imply that their child's not successful, or their child is making the classroom a difficult place to be, or their child is making their job harder. And that's something that absolutely raises the anxiety level in a parent and will start to wear down the trust between parent and teacher. Teachers, on the other hand, have communicated to me that they will send home a homeschool communication log, and then they're sick every day because they're worried about the email they're going to get, or what's going to be written in the next day that will criticize something that they've done or question their judgment calls. And while tensions absolutely exist, and I'm not saying that everybody's program is perfect, I'm saying that this system should be used in a very, very quote-unquote clean manner, and that your back and forth should be a routine, and it shouldn't be the place to vent feelings or emotions. That's very, very important. So I'm going to stop there, because now that I've given the background and the perspectives that have led to some of my recommendations, I just want to stop for a minute and see if there are any questions or comments that have popped up for any of you, or if you want to get any more information before I move on.
So I'm not seeing any. Just remember that you can type those questions into the question pane on the right sidebar, and sometimes as you're watching it'll minimize and you'll just see this little bitty bar, but if you'll click on that orange block with the white arrow, it'll bring it back out so you can actually type those in. And then of course don't forget that the handouts are also there for you to download at any time. I'm not seeing any questions. I was kind of hoping maybe that somebody might give them a few minutes to type something in, so but nothing so far. You want to move on?
All right, that sounds great. Thanks. Yep, even if you do, just type it when it pops into your brain. Okay, so now we're going to think about, now that I've said all that, now what? How do you make this work for everybody? How do you develop a system that's actually functional and effective, but is and will not take up a lot of time? How do you do this? So the first tip into developing a successful routine is to have a conversation and discuss mutual expectations around your homeschool system. So this should be teachers saying, here's what I would love from you. So an example, I want to support your child during community sharing activities. So think about in younger grades, morning circle, sharing time, even some social times, snack times, any times that kids are sharing with each other. And it's really helpful to know more about what students are doing outside of school. I actually wrote an article about using homeschool communication systems to give information to support narrative writing skills. And it really comes from my own experience, where I would do Monday morning journals with a couple of my students, and I would go and try to find out about their weekend so they could write it in their journals, and it was really hard for them to communicate information about their weekend. And I ended up starting to ask prompting questions. Did you go to the park? Okay, so you did? You went to the park? Okay, and it became this exercise in me planting ideas in their head and then helping them write it. Where within a homeschool communication system, a couple of bullets are, you know, we went to the Discovery Museum this weekend. It was amazing, and Johnny loved playing in the pirate ship. That's amazing. Okay, I can work with that, and I can help your child with their writing. I can help them share it when they're sitting in circles, in the circle. So in the same token, as parents, what is the information that you feel would be really valuable from school? And everybody has a different priority for the information that they want. Some parents want to have a conversation around the dinner table, just saying, hey, here's what I did with my day. Maybe ask siblings what they did with their day, and then support their child share some information about their day as well. That's essential. At the same time, some parents really want to be able to reinforce content that's happening in the curriculum. You know, if we think about the inclusion piece, you know, on a science topic related to habitats, I want to be able to supplement I want to be able to help fill in my child's background knowledge related to some of the content topics. So that's something that's important to me. When I read with my child every night, I want to know what I should be focusing on with them. I want to know when I should just give a word or when I should, you know, try to push to help them decode it. That's the kind of thing that will be helpful for me. Everyone's lens is a little different, but it's really worthwhile to talk about what is it you're hoping to get out of this system. So tip number 2 on how do we make it work for everyone: adopt consistent templates. This is really important because if you leave it very open-ended, people have many different ways of communicating information. So when I think about my practice, I know that for a lot of my students, there were different ways to kind of do a back and forth. And some people would say, I'm really comfortable with just a journal or a notebook that goes back and forth. Oh, all we do is a checklist. And it's hard because you want to make it work for everyone. And if I'm a teacher who does a checklist and a student who comes into my class the year after, if the parents are used to back and forth notebook where there's a narrative, then immediately there's some tension. And so templates are very, very helpful in making sure that people's style isn't contributing to some of the expectations. I worked, so one of my students had a one-on-one paraprofessional who was the primary person responsible for filling out the homeschool communication log. And her style, I mean, and this was many, many years ago, but her style was very much using a notebook, and she used to write a summary of what that student's day was like. And she did it during the last block of the day when that student came to me for some specialized instruction. So while the student sat with me, the para sat and sometimes wrote up to 3 pages. You know, when we teach reading to young children, we talk about a bed-to-bed summary. You know, young writers write about, I woke up in the morning, then I had breakfast, then this happened, and then we got in the car and my mom drove me to CVS. It's a bed-to-bed summary. And, you know, with readers, with young writers, we work on, you don't want to do a bed-to-bed summary. You want to, you know, pick a small slice of the day. And what was happening is a bed-to-bed summary was going home, relating every moment of that child's day. Well, the para ended up having, she had to leave, she had to go on leave for a couple of weeks. And I became the primary person responsible for fulfilling that professional responsibility. And so now I had to squeeze it in during the time that was set aside for this child's instruction. And the information that I communicated was much, much less comprehensive than what the para was communicating every single day in her narrative. And it created some tension because there wasn't as much in-depth information. My write-up was much more of a just the facts, ma'am, kind of style. And it's because we didn't have a structure around it, it really led to tension. We were able to work it out, but it's why you want to be proactive about this. Also, when we went through the reflection earlier in the presentation, there are lots of different pieces of information that we may want to get out of homeschool communication. And sometimes we try to squeeze all that information onto a daily log. And that is not as effective as adopting multiple templates for multiple purposes. Because it's really hard to develop a template where that one template meets all the needs of both parties. So I think it's very effective to develop a system that actually has 3 tiers. And the 3 tiers have very, very distinct purposes, and they also are not all daily communication systems. So if you look at this visual here, you'll see that within these tiers, the upper tiers are less frequent, so you would receive this template much less frequently. However, when you got it, you would have a lot more in-depth information. And then you move down the pyramid to the day-to-day home communication. And that does happen very frequently. However, the type of information that you're getting is a lot less in-depth. So the first tier really is around units within the general curriculum. We're working on habitats. We're getting into the American Revolution. We're doing the structure of cells. We're doing absolutism in Europe, you know, with the monarchies. All of these things are units, and units, especially as the grades get older, they cover a lot of time. And you're not going to get a daily summary of lesson plans. However, an adapted unit plan will provide you with what the essential pieces of information and knowledge that's expected of your child. And then you move down the tiers, and the update is really related to the specialized instruction piece. I want to be able to reinforce the sight words, the phonetic skills you're working on, the mathematics skills. And really what it's designed to do is to just keep the parents updated on where the instruction is focusing on related to the IEP. And it should include suggestions or strategies for generalizations. Homework routines it's very effective when the homework routines are centered right within this tier, because this is the targeted specialized instruction. We want it to be generalized. We want lots of practice. This is the tier for that. It's not daily, but it's more frequent than a unit plan. And then you have your day-to-day piece. So what do we need daily? We want to be able to foster conversation. We want to be able to remind parents of business elements. You know, these are the things that go home on a day-to-day basis. So let's look at a sample completed unit plan template. I've actually done, there are some webinars on the MDSC YouTube page that really go very in-depth into the that go very in depth into what a unit plan should focus on and how to create a unit plan. But essentially, based on the general curriculum, what are the specific content goals for your individual learner? What's the key vocabulary that your child will be responsible for? It doesn't mean that they're not going to interact with a lot of vocabulary. It means these are the words that we're going to really focus some instruction and practice around, and we're going to expect your child to be able to use that word, show that this is a word that they have a depth of understanding around. And then there's an additional skill focus that will be built into that unit. Oftentimes, when I create these, it's very much related to research, meaning finding more about something. Because I truly believe that that is something that we have to support our students with, because, not research as in you have to write a research paper, but a way to identify something that maybe you're interested in or a topic related to what you're learning about and getting more information about it. Right now all of us have a personal computer in our pocket, and think about how frequently you're in a conversation or watching a TV show and something pops up and you say, hey, who is the actor that guy in Major Crimes reminds me of somebody that I know I've seen before. I want to find out what else he's been in. When you're watching the Olympics, this is a really cool sport. I didn't know much about it. You go online and you find it out. And I think that this is a space where we can really help develop that skill for our kids, because when they're adults, we want them to find out more about things they're interested in. So that can be built into a unit plan. So the second tier, and I have to be really clear and say this is not a progress note, and I think that everyone has to be very, very careful that it's not being used as a progress note, because it can be confusing if some people are updating on a lot of progress through a tool like this versus a teacher who is communicating the focus of instruction and notes that will really support your generalization. Progress notes have a place and a purpose, and through progress notes you get updates on progress. But you do not want to build it in a routine where now you're getting progress notes. You don't want to turn this into a progress note, because it will just set up tensions when the next receiving teacher uses a template like this and is using it as it's designed, which is really to communicate where's the instructional focus within this chunk of time, and where should families work on generalizing this instruction. So the frequency of this is 1 to 2 weeks, and it should be directly tied into IEP goals. And when it goes home, you may notice that, especially for related service providers who may see your child once a week, the information may not change that frequently, because there are probably a lot of different activities that they're doing related to a specific skill. So for example, on here, the OT is continuing to work on handwriting. And that may not change through several cycles of this instruction, because on one day it may be, we're working on handwriting using this game, or today we're using whiteboards, then we're using chalkboards, and all of the different things that the teachers do to reinforce a skill That's not necessarily going to be broken down on here. But what you can do is that the OT may say, you know, practice, you know, have Johnny write his name on a whiteboard twice a night, twice every single night to practice. So that would go under the additional notes. You can also tie homework into this. So, for example, when you look at the reading, you know, what's the text? We're reading at the fair. We're focusing on these high frequency words. Here's the vocabulary. And, you know, should you tie it into homework? Practice reading each night. Remember to use the book talk menu, which is something that was probably given to the family. This is an example of how a template like this could be used to communicate that type of information. So now that families have the big picture related to curriculum, the details related to the specialized instruction, you think about what is left. What do I need to know on a day-to-day basis? And this is really designed to support that communication challenge and to foster conversation and interpersonal relationships. And it's also designed to facilitate the business elements of the day-to-day. You know, this is where you could write, our classroom is really hot, be sure to send a water bottle tomorrow. And, you know, things like that you want to make sure gets home immediately, and you want to make sure that, you know, for the kids where you say to the whole class, hey guys, make sure you bring a water bottle tomorrow, odds are your child will probably not come home and share that information with you. This would be the place to write something like that. So if you look at this template, there are kind of some buckets that will give parents, and then teachers, some information that can be used in a really productive way. Something interesting about my day. That's the kind of thing you talk about around the dinner table. Something I learned about today. If you know the child had OT, oh, did you see Ms. Botkin today? Oh, what'd you guys do? Or did you work on your handwriting? You can have those conversations. What are the special subjects? You know, if it's art and, you know, it might say we did a self-portrait today. You can talk about that with your child. There's a space where you can put those business elements, any other notes, you know, FYI, next week is when we start the solar system unit. Just some basic information to keep parents in the loop. But then at the bottom, there's the family notes and comments. And this is where you provide similar information to the school. We had dinner with Uncle Bill. They went to Japan. Hey, your Uncle Bill is home from Japan. Did you tell your friend about how he brought you a doll? You can really help with that kind of communication in the classroom. Facilitate those relationships and conversation. Also, because they went out to dinner with Uncle Bill, guess what? Sally went to bed really late last night. So that's a good heads up for me. If Sally's a little bit dysregulated, I kind of have a heads up. You know, she went to bed really late, so maybe I might not push it as much as I would on another day. I might give her a little bit more space, or I will understand if demands are triggering dysregulation or avoidance. I have a little bit of a heads up about that. And also, I have a question. I know you guys have a field trip coming up. What's the date? I want to make sure I put it on my calendar. This is the place for that type of information. That's what it would look like for a younger student. This is an example of how it could be modified for an older student. I love tables. It's just kind of how my brain works. But, you know, you could make this, you know, more or less with boxes. This is a little bit more, it's a little bit more sophisticated looking. This is what it could look like at an upper grade level. And then just to think about the kinds of prompts that would go into it. You know, you could write something new that was introduced. You know, we're still working on adding and subtracting in math, and we played a really fun game with a couple of friends. You know, these prompts can just kind of remind you of the types of information that can go back and forth in a homeschool communication system that really supports the intended function of this tool. So how do you make it work for everyone? Make sure that information is flowing both ways. That's really important to make sure that it doesn't become one-sided. You don't want, you know, the log, you know, for teachers to fill out the log and it comes home, you know, it keeps going back and forth and you don't even know if a parent has seen it. That can feel a little frustrating. And same with the parents. If the log comes home, you know, on multiple days and nothing is filled in, that can be concerning. The ball will absolutely drop every once in a while. You know, you didn't get home from soccer until 9, you barely got your kids to bed, you didn't get a chance to write in it, no big deal. You know, same in school, you know, the assembly went late, you didn't get back to the classroom until, you know, you're telling kids to run and get their backpack, you didn't get a chance. Stuff like that happens, but you want to make sure that it's not happening for an extreme amount of time that people feel as though they're not getting information. And so one last thing I want to put out there is that in my experience, related to homeschool communication, a daily summary that highlights unexpected behaviors is rarely helpful for anyone. And I have had more parents say to me, ugh, I feel like I need a glass of wine to read the homeschool notebook. And honestly, that exact phrase from more than one parent, and it's almost always related to reading about the unexpected things that a child has done during the day. And it's not that helpful to a parent because it raises anxiety level. It just feels kind of yucky. And it's not that helpful to the teacher because especially if it's a blip during the day and you've handled it, you moved on, the student redirected well, was able to move to the next thing, you've moved on. No one is talking about it again. You know, for parents, think about a Saturday with your child. Are there any moments during that day where your child does something unexpected? Yes. And a parent of a typical child or a parent of a child with special needs will both say, absolutely. My kids went to school at 8:30 this morning and there were at least 3 things that happened that drove me bananas. However, I don't need to be talking about those 3 things again at 3 o'clock this afternoon. And for kids, if they've moved on, to have it rehashed within this system can just not be that helpful. For teachers, it often leads to, you know, this did happen, but I feel like I need to explain the precedent and then the follow-up, and it's sometimes hard to communicate the real feeling of something that happened during the day. Most students who have complex learning needs have moments of dysregulation, and it's something we are working on. Across the board, I guarantee that all of our kids are working on something, whether they have complex learning needs or they don't. And we don't always benefit from hearing every moment during the day that they have had those moments. It's rarely helpful. If something happens, a phone call, if something really needs to be followed up on, it should not be communicated through this system. A phone call, some other way to talk about that behavior that requires follow-up shouldn't be through this system. And For the majority of kids who have more complex behavioral needs, odds are there's data being collected, odds are there's a behavior specialist somehow involved, and there's other documentation of behavior. There is absolutely a space to review the behavioral information. However, it is my opinion that this real targeted homeschool system should not be the place to incorporate that behavior-based data. So that is my final thought, and I know that we have at least one question, so I want to make sure that I get to that and address it. And if anybody else has any questions, make sure that you type them in now. Yes, by unexpected behaviors, do I mean behaviors? We do list aggressive behaviors, and you want to know that. And, you know, I mean, this is definitely an opinion. I use the word unexpected behaviors related to the language that I use with my students that's really tied into the social thinking curriculum. Because, well, there's a lot behind that, but that is the language that I use. So if there are aggressive behaviors, you may want to know that. And I do know that at the end of the day, you and your team have to work something out that is going to meet your needs. My thought related to wanting to know, I've heard a lot of families say that it makes them very anxious to really know a number at the end of every single day, versus there is tracking of aggressive behaviors that's happening, and the summary of that can be sent home perhaps even every week in a summary of data. Here are the number of aggressive incidents that happened this week. But I know that people need what they need, but I think that using this particular tool, I truly believe that this tool should not be something that leads to anxiety or high emotions. There's anxiety and high emotions fraught enough around a million other aspects of your child's program. I think that this tool is really, really effective when what's communicated through this type of system is very, very predictable, is what I'd like to say. So, but again, you have to make it work for you, and you have to make it work for your team. It's hard during this platform to not have face-to-face or be able to hear back from people, but that's kind of my best answer that I can give through this platform.
There's another question. Do you want to read that?
You know what? Hold on one second. Let me just make it a little bit bigger so I can see it. Okay, how do you get a team to switch to it? Okay, so the question is, how do you get a team to switch to a tiered communication system I suggested when they've been doing it one way for a while? We use a daily Google Doc, but I don't get curriculum information. In first grade, so your child is in first grade and it's the second time around with the same team. So the daily Google Doc may work great for you guys. I would, you know, because these templates on a Google Doc is a great way to make this happen. You know, part of what I do through my workshops is also encourage the inter-team communication to be focused on a Google Doc so people are providing their information. One of these handouts that you can download today provides an overview of what this three-tiered system can look like. And if you sit down with your team and talk to them and say, hey, you know, I saw this workshop on homeschool communication, and here was something that was proposed, and I wanted to share it with you and to see if maybe we can start incorporating some of these elements. And I think that for anybody, so when you look at what you're actually sharing within the daily Google Doc, is there anything on there that would be replaced by incorporating some of these less frequent tiers of communications? And if so, bring that up and say, you know, on our homeschool communication, you're doing a lot of, you know, I know you're summarizing a lot of what you do. Let's think about maybe looking at a summary in the beginning of what you're going to be focusing on with my child all throughout first grade in the simple machines unit. That way it doesn't have to happen daily, similar to the specialized instruction. So my biggest piece of advice in how do you try to persuade a team to adopt a system like this is to really try to show them that this isn't necessarily more work for them, it's just developing a different routine.
So there's one that came across the chat, so I'll read that to you.
Okay.
I've tried to get curriculum overview about science and social studies from special ed teacher and general ed teacher since beginning of school year without success. There's no communication system like this set up on IEP. I really need to include in the IEP. Just realize that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's hard because a lot of times you're really just fighting to get some basic information, and I absolutely understand that. And I think that getting somebody in your school to see what the value of something like this would be is really helpful, because they can sort of be your cheerleaders for the people who you actually need to buy into it in order to make this happen. The curriculum unit plan is something that I believe is a best practice, and I know it does not always, I know it doesn't happen as frequently as it should throughout most districts. And when I actually go into districts and work with them, my coaching and my professional development is often very much related right in developing that routine. I don't know if it's helpful for you, but again, the MDSC YouTube page has a webinar that we've done, I think it might have even been 2 years ago now, that really does a step-by-step related to creating a unit plan. I don't know how open your teachers would be to, checking it out, and you could say, hey, I saw this webinar. I think that, I would love to be getting some information about this. I know that there's access to some recorded webinars that really talk a little bit more in depth about some of these elements and maybe direct them to it. I don't know. I think that might be the best answer I could give right now, not knowing your team or your teachers.
So I did post the link to the YouTube page.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That's great. That's great. Now, is there another question? Because I can't see it right here.
No, I'm not seeing any more questions. It's last opportunity.
Okay, yes. And before you log out, I want everyone to make sure that they just quickly answer the last 2 questions in the poll. Because your feedback related to our webinars really helps shape what the next one will look like. So I think it's probably popping up right now.
Yes, it's launched. Please let us know if the information presented was very useful, somewhat useful, not useful at all. Go ahead and please just choose one. Oh, we got 67%. We probably just need a couple more people to finish up.
All right, great.
All right. Okay, last chance, going to close the poll, and we will close that poll, and then I will get ready and launch the next one. And it's launching now, so please let us know if the presenter was, and you have 4 options: very engaging, engaging, somewhat engaging, or not engaging at all. So we have getting close to half. Come on, there we go. Go ahead and choose. We're up past 67%. One more little moment, and I'll let them finish up the poll and close it while you go on.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank everybody for taking their time today to log on and participate. I know that for a lot of you it might have been during your lunchtime. We try to scatter our webinars to meet the needs of people who the evenings are terrible for them and for people who the day is terrible for them. But you know, thank you again for logging on, and, you know, stay in touch with the DSAIA and the MDSC, and in order to get information about our next webinar that we'll be planning for over the next couple of months. And we really appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.